They said the palace never truly slept. Even at midnight, candles flickered behind the iron-barred windows of a lonely tower. Guards whispered of a sound no one dared to confirm, the soft creak of a coffin lid opening. Inside that cold chamber, the Queen of Castile lay beside a wooden casket, her pale face lit by candlelight. Her name was Joanna, but history would remember her by another name, Joanna the Mad. At first glance, she didn't seem like the kind of queen who would end her nights next to death. She had been born into glory, the daughter of Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon, rulers who united Spain. Her childhood was one of discipline, faith, and fear. She was taught to pray longer than she slept, to walk with grace, and to never let her emotions rule her. But emotions were the only thing Joanna truly had. When she was sent to the Netherlands to marry Philip the Handsome, the young Prince of Burgundy, she didn't expect to fall in love. But Philip was charming, and for the first time, Joanna felt free. Their early days were filled with laughter, dancing, and wild affection. Yet the same passion that made her love him also made her fragile. She grew jealous, obsessive, afraid of losing him, traits the royal court whispered about behind her back. Still, she was a queen, and queens did not weep. Until the day Philip died. It was sudden, cruel, and final. Some said poison, others said fever. Joanna didn't believe any of them. She refused to let him go. She ordered the body to be embalmed and sealed in an ornate coffin lined with black velvet. But she couldn't bear to bury him dead. She demanded that the coffin travel wherever she went, through storm, through snow, through the darkest hours of the Spanish night. Servants began to talk. They said the queen would kneel by the coffin for hours, whispering prayers, sometimes laughter. She refused to allow any woman near it, fearing her dead husband might somehow still be tempted. When her counselors begged her to move on, Joanna stared at them with hollow eyes and said softly, "He is still mine." And then one night the guards saw something even stranger. The queen, ordering her bed, moved beside the coffin. From that night on, she would not sleep without it. They called it madness. But the truth of why she did it, that was something even darker. The royal court tried to stop her, but no one could reason with a woman whose heart had shattered beyond repair. After Philip's death in 1506, Queen Joanna began a journey that became one of the most haunting in royal history, a funeral procession that never ended. She ordered Philip's coffin to be carried across Castile, from village to village, refusing to allow it to rest in a church or crypt. The sight was terrifying and unforgettable. In the cold mist of the Spanish countryside, torches lit the night as monks and soldiers escorted the queen and her husband's coffin through mud, rain, and silence. Peasants who saw the strange procession crossed themselves, whispering that the queen had gone mad. But in her mind, Joanna was not mourning. She was keeping a promise. She had sworn that Philip would never be alone, not even in death. Each night the queen demanded the coffin be placed beside her bed. She would touch the wood softly, whispering to him as if he might respond. Sometimes the guards claimed they heard her laughing in the dark. Other times they swore they heard her sobbing, long hollow cries that echoed through the empty halls. But what terrified them most was her refusal to let priests approach the coffin. When one tried to perform a blessing, she shouted that no other man would ever speak over Philip's body. "He sleeps only with me watching," she declared. Her counselors wrote letters to her parents, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, begging them to intervene. But even they struggled to understand their daughter's obsession. Isabella had raised her to be devout, not unhinged. Yet when Ferdinand arrived to confront her, he found Joanna clutching the coffin, her face pale and her eyes burning with devotion. "Father," she said quietly, "they want to take him from me." Ferdinand's face hardened. "He's already gone, Joanna. Let him rest." But she refused. When guards tried to take the coffin away, she screamed so violently that soldiers hesitated to touch her. She ordered her carriage, turned around, and continued traveling, avoiding daylight, churches, and even women. Rumors spread that she traveled only by night because she didn't want other men to see her beloved husband, even in death. For years, the journey continued. Villages awoke to see the torchlit shadow of a queen and her coffin passing through their streets. Some believed she was cursed. Others whispered that the queen's love had bound her soul to a ghost. But what no one knew was that Joanna's madness wasn't entirely her own. someone had been quietly feeding it. Behind the queen's haunting devotion lay a secret no one dared speak aloud, a secret that explained not just her madness, but who had pushed her toward it. Queen Joanna's obsession with her husband, Philip the Handsome, hadn't begun as love. It had begun as control. Philip was known across Europe for his beauty, but he was also known for his cruelty. To him, women were trophies, and marriage was a game of power. When he first met Joanna, he mocked her Spanish manner and fiery temper until he realized she was heir to one of the richest thrones in the world. But after their wedding, something twisted inside him. He began taking mistresses openly, humiliating Joanna in front of her court. When she wept, he would sneer and call her the mad Spaniard. Her jealousy, he claimed, was madness, and he made sure everyone believed it. Spread rumors about her unstable mind, calling her unfit to rule. Those lies took root. Even her own father, King Ferdinand, began to doubt her sanity. But the truth was more tragic. Joanna was not insane. She was being gaslighted by the men who stood to gain from her downfall. After Philip's sudden death, rumored to be from typhoid, though some whispered poison, his allies moved fast. They needed Joanna declared unfit so they could rule in her name. What better proof than a grieving queen sleeping beside a coffin every night? What they didn't expect was that she would take the coffin and flee, keeping her husband's body always within reach, making it impossible for them to hide the truth. In secret letters discovered later, one of her attendants wrote, "The queen weeps for her husband, but she also fears those who plot against her. She says the coffin is her only witness, that inside it lies not only Philip's body, but proof of his betrayal." No one knew what she meant by that. Some believed she carried love letters that could expose political secrets. Others claimed Philip's body bore marks, evidence that he had not died of disease but of poison. If Joanna had spoken, history might have changed, but she never had the chance. Ferdinand's soldiers finally caught her near the town of Tordesillas. They seized the coffin and locked her in a remote castle, declaring her unfit to rule. The queen, who had once commanded armies, was now a prisoner, trapped not by her grief, but by those who feared her truth. Yet even in her stone cell, one thing remained constant: the coffin. It was placed beside her once more, and every night she whispered to it, as if confiding secrets no one else would ever hear. The fortress of Tordesillas stood like a tomb overlooking the Duero River, cold, gray, and eternal. And inside its thick walls, Queen Joanna of Castile began the slow descent from royalty to legend. Her father, King Ferdinand, ordered that she be confined there for her own safety. But everyone in the court knew the truth. It wasn't protection. It was containment. Joanna's rooms were sparse, stripped of comfort and light. The windows were shuttered, the corridors guarded day and night. Now the coffin of Philip the Handsome was brought to her chamber under strict orders that it'd never leave her sight. Some claimed Ferdinand allowed it not out of compassion, but because her obsession made her easier to control. The guards whispered that she spoke to the coffin as though it were alive. Every morning she would kneel before it, her hands trembling, murmuring words no one could understand. At night, she sang lullabies, the same songs she had sung when her husband was alive. But sometimes the singing turned to screams that echoed through the halls. When priests came to offer confession, she refused. "You come to spy for my father," she told them. "You think I'm mad, but the real madness sits on the throne." For years she was kept isolated from her children. Her son Charles was taken to Flanders to be raised by strangers, a decision that shattered her. By the time he returned as King Charles I of Spain, Joanna no longer trusted anyone. Witnesses said her appearance had changed beyond recognition. Her once glossy hair was streaked with white, her eyes hollow and haunted. She wandered the halls barefoot, clutching a rosary made of bone. When guards tried to take it from her, she bit their hands and hissed, "He's still watching me." Ferdinand visited her only once after her imprisonment began. When he entered the room, Joanna didn't rise. She just stared at him and whispered, "You took my crown, my children, and my love, but not my truth." He turned and left without a word. The years bled into decades. Outside her prison, the world changed. Kings rose and fell, empires expanded, but within those cold walls, time stood still. Her coffin remained by her side, covered in dust, untouched by anyone but her. Some say she began to believe she too was dead, a ghost trapped between worlds, bound to her husband by chains of love and madness. But one night a guard reported something strange. He claimed to hear her laughing softly in the dark, whispering, "He's come back for me." The next morning, Joanna's room was silent. When Queen Joanna of Castile finally took her last breath in 1555, she was 75 years old, having spent nearly half a century imprisoned within the walls of Tordesillas. Her death brought no royal mourning, no grand procession, no songs of farewell. Only the guards and a few priests attended her burial. And even they stood in silence, too fearful to speak of what they had seen over the years. The woman once called Joanna the Mad had outlived nearly everyone who had conspired to silence her father, Ferdinand, her husband, Philip, and most of her tormentors. Yet she remained a prisoner until the very end. Her coffin, the one she had slept beside for decades, was finally taken away to rest in the royal crypt. But by then, no one could tell whose presence haunted those walls more, Philip's or hers. The strange thing was, her story didn't end with her death. In the years that followed, whispers spread across Spain that her ghost still lingered in Tordesillas. Pilgrims claimed they could hear footsteps pacing in the night, and the faint creak of a coffin lid opening. Some swore that they heard a woman weeping, not with sorrow, but with relief. But historians who revisited her story centuries later found something even more chilling. Documents that proved Joanna might never have been truly insane. Letters, journals, and eyewitness accounts painted a new picture, one of a brilliant, passionate woman who had been systematically broken by the men in her life. Philip had humiliated her. Ferdinand had used her. And even her son, Charles V, the great Holy Roman Emperor, had kept her imprisoned, fearing that if she spoke, her words might shake the foundations of his power. In truth, Joanna's greatest crime wasn't madness, it was defiance. She refused to be a quiet wife, a silent widow, or a powerless queen. Her love, though tragic, had made her dangerous. And in a world where kings ruled by control, a woman driven by emotion was considered more terrifying than an army. But today, her story is told as both a warning and a mystery. Was she truly mad, or merely trapped in the shadows of men who feared her voice? No one can say for sure, but one thing is undeniable. In a time when women were expected to kneel, Queen Joanna stood unyielding. Even locked in a stone prison, even surrounded by whispers of madness, she remained loyal to her truth. And perhaps that's why, centuries later, her name still haunts the halls of Spanish history, not as a madwoman, but as a queen who refused to die forgotten. After her death, the world did what powerful men had always done. It rewrote Queen Joanna's story. Chroniclers, most of them loyal to her father and son, painted her as a woman consumed by madness and jealousy. They called her Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad, turning her pain into entertainment for future generations. They wrote of a queen who slept beside a corpse, who refused to bury her husband, who raved and ranted through the night. But they omitted what caused it: betrayal, isolation, and the political schemes that stripped her of power. Her suffering became a symbol of insanity, not injustice. Over the centuries, her image was reshaped again and again. Painters depicted her as a pale widow clutching a coffin under a stormy sky, surrounded by monks and soldiers. Poets described her as the embodiment of doomed love, a woman so loyal that it drove her insane. But none of them saw the truth hiding beneath the legend, a woman destroyed by those who feared her strength. Historians later found evidence that her madness was carefully exaggerated. Letters from her attendants revealed moments of clarity and intelligence. She questioned taxes, planned trade routes, and even issued orders from captivity. Hardly the acts of a lunatic. So why did they call her mad? Because the label served a purpose. It allowed her father, Ferdinand, to rule in her name. It later justified her son Charles V's empire, the greatest in Europe at the time. By portraying Joanna as unstable, they made their power look necessary, even noble. One document uncovered in the 20th century contained Ferdinand's chilling words: "Better she be thought mad than she be allowed to rule." It was not madness that kept her locked away, it was politics. And once her name was stained with insanity, there was no going back. Even when truth surfaced centuries later, the legend was too powerful to erase. Yet the people of Spain never fully forgot her humanity. In the town of Tordesillas, where she was imprisoned, villagers still tell stories of a ghostly queen who walks by the river at night. They say she holds a candle and whispers, "Do you see him? He still watches me?" Perhaps that's how history remembers women like Joanna, not as rulers, but as restless spirits, wandering through centuries of lies. Her story isn't just about madness or love. It's about how easily truth can be buried under power. By the time her story was retold across Europe, Queen Joanna's so-called madness had already been weaponized, not just against her, but against every woman who dared to question a man's rule. In royal courts and cathedrals, her name became a warning. Do not let passion rule your mind, or you'll end up like Joanna the Mad. But the truth behind her downfall ran far deeper and darker than love and loss. During her imprisonment, a handful of secret reports were sent between the courts of Spain and Flanders. In them, ambassadors described strange arrangements within the Spanish court. Philip Elias and Ferdinand, his advisors, had struck a silent pact. Together they agreed that Joanna's voice could not be trusted, especially after she began speaking openly about Philip's affairs, accusing nobles and bishops by name. She had seen too much. She knew who had shared her husband's bed, who had plotted for power, and who had taken bribes from foreign rulers. To silence her, they did not need assassins. They only needed a label. Madwoman. Once branded insane, everything she said lost weight. Every tear became proof. Every cry for justice became hysteria. It was the perfect trap, a political weapon disguised as mercy. Even her son, Emperor Charles V, carried that deception forward. When he took control of Spain, he made a calculated decision to keep his mother locked away forever, claiming it was to protect her. But the real reason was protection of himself. If Joanna had been declared sane, her right to rule would have outweighed his. In the hidden letters between royal advisors, a single sentence exposed it all. The queen must remain a widow, and the world must believe her heart is lost to madness. Only thus can the empire stand. And so it did. While Charles ruled an empire that stretched from Europe to the Americas, his mother lived and died inside a single dark room. Name was used to justify the same patriarchal control that silenced countless women for centuries afterward. But history, though written by victors, cannot bury every truth. Centuries later, when historians uncovered these letters, the story changed. Joanna's madness became something else: resistance. Her refusal to let go of the coffin, her endless devotion, her anger, all became signs of a woman who refused to surrender to the lies around her. They had called her Juana la Loca to shame her. But now she is remembered by another name whispered in Spain's old towns: La Reina Fiel, the faithful queen. Centuries passed, and the legend of Joanna the Mad turned into myth, a ghost story whispered in Spanish classrooms and candlelit taverns. But in the late 19th century, historians digging through royal archives and ancient burial sites stumbled upon something that reignited the mystery. The long-lost coffin of Philip the Handsome, the man who had haunted Joanna's life. When the tombs of the royal chapel in Granada were opened for restoration, scholars expected nothing more than a decaying coffin and royal insignia. Instead, they found evidence that fueled old suspicions. Philip's body had been moved multiple times after his death, just as Joanna had claimed centuries earlier. Records revealed that after Joanna's capture, Ferdinand ordered Philip's remains secretly transferred to prevent her from visiting them. But for years, her attendants wrote that she refused to believe the coffin was empty. "She says he speaks from within," one monk wrote. "And sometimes, I fear she may be right." The discovery confirmed that the coffin she had guarded all those years was not the true resting place of her husband. She had slept beside an empty box, a hollow symbol of her grief and manipulation. That revelation changed everything historians thought they knew about her. It meant that the woman mocked for her obsession had, in truth, been deceived by her own family, tricked into mourning a lie. It was the final betrayal in a life already poisoned by deceit. When these findings were published, a wave of reevaluation swept through Spain. Scholars began to ask, was her madness real, or was it the only way she could survive in a world that denied her every truth? Poets and playwrights revived her image, not as a mad queen, but as a tragic heroine, a woman so deeply human that her emotions threatened an empire built on control. Artists painted her again, this time not as a ghostly widow, but as a defiant queen, standing beside an empty coffin, her eyes burning with sorrow and defiance. Modern Spain, her story became a lesson about how easily power can rewrite reality. Her name was whispered, not with pity, but with awe. The woman who had been silenced for half a century had finally reclaimed her voice. And perhaps the greatest irony of all, it was through the discovery of an empty coffin that the truth about her life was finally filled. Today, more than 5 centuries after her death, Queen Joanna of Castile, once mocked as Juana la Loca, is finally being remembered for what she truly was. Not a madwoman, but a victim of power and a symbol of endurance in a world ruled by manipulation. In Spain, her story has been retold in films, books, and plays. Modern historians call her the most misunderstood queen in Europe. Her prison in Tordesillas has been turned into a historical site, cold, silent, and unchanged, as if time itself refused to erase her presence. Visitors still leave white roses at the window where she was said to have whispered to her husband's coffin. But what draws people most isn't the tragedy, it's the strength hidden beneath it. Joanna was not the fragile, broken woman that history once painted. She was intelligent, devout, and determined, a queen who fought to keep her voice when every man around her tried to silence it. Her so-called madness, historians now say, was grief sharpened by betrayal. She lost her husband, her freedom, and her crown, yet she never stopped resisting the lies built against her. Even as the walls closed in, she clung to her truth. And in doing so, she became something more powerful than any throne could offer, immortal in memory. Her son, Emperor Charles V, would go on to rule one of the largest empires in history, from Spain to the Americas. Yet in the end, it was his mother's name, not his, that survived in whispers and legends. The people called her La Reina, feel the faithful queen. She had been buried alive in stone, but her story refused to die. In art, she became the embodiment of eternal love and human defiance. Painters captured her standing beside the coffin, not in madness, but in mourning. Writers described her not as cursed, but as consecrated, a woman who refused to be erased. And in every retelling, one question remains: who was truly mad? The queen who loved too deeply, or the world that punished her for it? Perhaps that is Joanna's final revenge. But centuries after her captors turned to dust, her name still echoes through history, stronger than theirs ever did. The woman who is buried in silence now speaks louder than all who silenced her, and somewhere in the quiet halls of Tordesillas, the wind still seems to whisper her final vow: "He may have left me, but I never left the truth."